Mortgage pain for millions as interest rates hit the highest in 15 years. The shock move to 5% was in response to the dire inflation update this week. The Bank of England governor admitting it'll hurt.
If we don't get inflation back down to target, then it goes on for much longer and the pain goes on for longer.
I'm here to tell you that I am totally 100% on it, and it is going to be okay, and we are going to get through this.
The PM's reassurance might ring hollow for those who tonight will be deeply worried about how they'll manage in what could be a defining moment in the run-up to the next election. We'll get analysis from Robert and from Joel. Also on News at 10 tonight.
The debris is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel.
All hope is lost. All 5 on the Titan sub have died. Debris is found on the seabed. Adapt and survive, the robots designed by Ukrainian soldiers to rescue their wounded comrades. Fury among survivors of abuse in the Church of England. It sacks its independent experts. One tells us of her anger.
There isn't the commitment to victims and survivors they are talking about. There isn't the commitment to independent safeguarding.
And all the King's horses. Winner's joy for Charles at Ascot. And a moment of memories for Zara.
Bittersweet, isn't it? You think how proud and excited our grandmother would have been.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. There is now no doubt just how concerned the Bank of England is about how fast prices are still rising. It put up interest rates yet again, not by 0.25% this time, but by 0.5% to try to bring inflation down further. The base rate is now a high 5%, something for savers to celebrate perhaps, but something to fear for those with mortgages or loans. The Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, said he knew there would be pain for people, but if the bank didn't do this now, it would be worse later and for longer. The Prime Minister said he supported the bank's decision. At an IKEA warehouse, Mr Sunak assembled what he hopes will be a reassuring message. He is totally 100% on it, he said, and claimed it's going to be okay.
The Bank of England, it has one job, to keep inflation at 2%, and it's been failing pretty miserably, which is why it again put up interest rates today by 0.5% to 5%, causing misery to the more than 1 million homeowners coming off fixed-rate mortgages over the coming year.
Well, I understand the difficulty and the pain it causes for many people, and I do understand that. What I would say, though, is that if we don't get inflation back down to target, then it goes on for much longer and the pain goes on for longer, and none of us want that.
But for single mother Betty McLean from Harrogate in Yorkshire, the pain is those higher interest and mortgage rates.
I don't save any money anymore. We don't have treats because ultimately the goal is to keep a roof over our heads, and all those other things have to just wait. They just have to, what do? You've just got to save money somewhere.
Becky and hundreds of thousands of others with mortgages are in difficulties because there have been so many recent rises in the Bank of England's interest rate, from a record low of 0.1%, almost zero, in March 2020, to 0.5% in February 2022. Up a further 4% in just 15 months to 4.5% in May this year, and today up another 0.5% to 5%. So with mortgage rates for 2-year deals now over 6%, the Prime Minister at an IKEA warehouse in Kent said he feels the country's pain.
We are going to get through this and we're going to get this done.
Prime Minister, you'll be aware that markets are today discounting a significant risk of recession. Are falling house prices, rising unemployment, a recession, a price worth paying to get inflation down?
Nobody wants to see a recession. Of course I don't want to see a recession. No one wants to see a recession. And actually, part of the reason that we're seeing inflation be higher than we had anticipated previously is because the economy has done better. Look, I've never said this is going to be easy, right? Like, getting inflation down, I've always said this is going to be tough and it's going to take time.
you have to ask the question why the UK is always hit the hardest. And the answer to that is 13 years of absolute failure under this government, a kamikaze budget and a failure to fix the fundamentals.
What practical help could the government give those struggling to pay their mortgages?
Well, we're seeing lots of suggestions of big bailout schemes for people to help them pay their mortgages. Those just aren't going to happen, not least because they would probably lead to even higher interest rates. But what we can do and we should be doing is strengthening the safety net for those mortgage borrowers who are really struggling, maybe because they've lost their job. There's an existing scheme to do that, the support for mortgage interest. It should be strengthened now.
On the job. But the Prime Minister said the biggest contribution he could make to crushing inflation is by not borrowing, not cutting taxes, not giving nurses and teachers pay rises. Yes, he knows that in the current mess, he won't win any popularity contests. Robert Peston, News at 10.
Robert joins us now from Westminster. I mean, we heard the PM, Robert, saying he's 100% on it. You've ruled out all the things he can't do. What can he do? What actually can he do to make a difference here?
Well, I mean, let's just go back to his statement that he doesn't want a recession. To be clear, economists, investors now think there is a very big risk of a recession. With interest rates at these levels, there are many people who think the housing market will crack. There is a genuine risk that unemployment is going to rise very significantly. And part of the reason for that, and actually two members of the Monetary Policy Committee made this clear, is there are such lags between putting up interest rates. We don't actually know whether the 4% odd rise in interest rates that's taken place over the last 15 months is actually, in the next few weeks and months, actually going to get inflation down, so that this extra 0.5% is that famous sledgehammer to crack a nut that, you know, really does very significant damage. I mean, one of the things he said when I saw him in the surreal environment of that IKEA warehouse is that the best thing that he can do to help the Bank of England get inflation down is basically nothing. He's under enormous pressure to cut taxes, to spend more on the wages of public service workers, to spend more on health and schools. And he says he can't do that because if he borrows to do that, that'll make inflation even worse. And it's slightly odd, isn't it, to hear the Prime Minister saying, you know, do nothing is the best strategy. He did, however, say something that really stood out for me. And because this is now becoming a debate pretty much everywhere else in the world, but not in the UK, he said that they were keeping a very watchful eye on whether supermarkets were pricing properly. Up to now, the government has been very resistant to the idea that it may have to impose some price controls. But if things get really bad here in the UK, this is going to be a very real issue, whether or not we're going to have to go back to the kind of policies we haven't seen since the 70s, which is actually limiting price rises.
OK, Robert, thank you very much for taking us through all of that. Of course, one of those 5 key pledges from the Prime Minister is on halving inflation, as we've alluded to already. Joel is here now to take us through what we heard from the Governor of the Bank of England about how long this is going to be hurting for. He's trying to save some pain in the future, but this is tough stuff, isn't it?
It is, and obviously it wasn't meant to be like this. You don't have to go back very far, Julie. The beginning of the year, the Bank of England seemed extremely confident that inflation by now would be falling really quite sharply. It isn't, and at midday we had the result, and it was a bigger hike than most people had been expecting. It took everyone slightly by surprise, but the bank is trying to get ahead of this, having been seen as being behind the curve slightly. Now they're trying to get out in front of it. Well, there is an issue here, and it does play to credibility. What you've seen in the last 4 months is what the bank has said will happen to inflation hasn't happened. And 4 misses in a row, you've got a problem. People start to think, well, hang on, has the bank got what it takes? Is it on top of the situation? Can it bring and restore price stability? So that's what sits behind this. I think the other message that came out of the bank today is that wage growth is now causing inflation. You've got private sector pay running at about 7.6% a year. Well, that's not quite strong enough to keep pace with inflation. But what it is meaning is that, in the bank's view, firms are having to raise prices to finance those pay rises. So you've got a situation here where wages and prices are really moving upwards together in tandem and feeding one another. And that's the cycle the bank is hoping to break. It's hoping that higher interest rates, unfortunately, will squeeze households, mortgage holders, first and foremost, in many instances, leaving them worse off. They will not be able to spend as much as they could, and it will squeeze businesses as well. They'll make less money. They won't be in a position where they can raise their prices. That's the brutal truth about this. What the bank is basically saying is that unemployment today may be very low, but it's unsustainably low. The British economy is barely growing. It's chucking off and generating high rates of inflation. Another headache for the government, as Robert was alluding to there, is how do you explain to voters, come the next general election, they're feeling worse off, the value of their greatest asset isn't worth what they thought it was, and they're looking abroad and seeing that other countries haven't necessarily got the same problems. At the moment, as it stands, the UK does look like an outlier. Prices are rising here faster than in any other G7 country, and tonight, Julie, interest rates are rising in the UK faster than in the Eurozone and faster in the United States. That's not a great position to be in.
And a lot of families deeply worried tonight, no doubt. Joel, thank you very much indeed for taking us through all of that. Now to the search for the submarine that went missing near the wreck of the Titanic, and it has sadly ended in tragedy. The US Coast Guard said it had found 5 main pieces of wreckage, including the nose cone on the seabed a third of a mile from the Titanic's bow. There was a catastrophic implosion of the submarine, maybe when contact was lost on Sunday afternoon. Asked whether the bodies of the 5 men could be recovered, the Coast Guard talked of the unforgiving environment down there.
On Saturday, the Titan's team of 5 left behind North America's most easterly port on their mission to the Titanic. The submersible leaving St John's on the Polar Prince. But after losing all contact on Sunday, a huge international search began. Tonight, confirmation from US Coast Guards that all hopes of survival had gone.
The debris is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel. I offer my deepest condolences to the families. I can only imagine what this has been like for them, and I hope that this discovery provides some solace during this difficult time.
This was the Titan as it set off beneath the Atlantic on its journey 3,800 metres below to the Titanic. On board, Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman, businessman and explorer Hamish Harding, French Titanic expert Paul-Henri Nargeolet, and the CEO of the company operating the submersible, Stockton Rush. In a statement, OceanGate said, "These men were true explorers who shared a distinct spirit of adventure and a deep passion for exploring and protecting the world's oceans. Our hearts are with these 5 souls and every member of their families during this tragic time. We grieve the loss of life and joy they brought to everyone they knew." The questions over what happened on board the Titan are for another day. Tonight, the thoughts of people here in St John's and many others around the world who followed this are with the victims' families. One diving expert who's been down to the Titanic's wreck calls it a place of scorching fear and fugitive beauty. Tonight, for the victims' families, the worst of their fears have been realised. 5 adventurers who'd set off from here, full of excitement, now at rest in the shimmering seas beyond. Neil Connery, News at 10, St John's, Newfoundland.
And Lucy joins us from Boston again tonight, where what was a rescue operation was being coordinated, and the saddest of conclusions to all of this, Lucy. Just take us through what you've witnessed there.
Oh, Julie, it was a sombre press conference here this afternoon. You could sense the genuine sadness among the US Coast Guards at having to deliver the news that the 5 crew members had died. And these are people who are used to a life at sea, but they understand the powerful destructive nature of the ocean. And I asked the Admiral, the man in charge of this entire search operation, was there anything more, anything quicker that could have been done to save these 5 lives? And he said no. It was a catastrophic implosion and accident. Now, the Titan submersible was operating in the bowels of the ocean, a hostile environment, using the most advanced experimental technology, just like the Titanic more than a century ago. It was deemed as pioneering. And this voyage that they were on in 2023, I suppose, is testament to the enduring fascination with that ship. These were men who were enthralled by the science of it, its very existence, and its story, that have tragically died alongside it.
Lucy, thank you. Now, if you were watching last night, you won't have forgotten the startling pictures of trench warfare from the battlefields of eastern Ukraine. The parallels with the First World War were plain to see, of course, a form of war from another age. But the actual machinery of fighting and surviving is changing. The Ukrainian battalion, whose pictures those were, are using robots now to recover their injured from the battlefield.
They're on a mission to evacuate an injured colleague. Under constant shelling and pinned down by Russian drones. They take cover. Then head for the open ground. They're being watched from above. And targeted. They push on. Finally, they reach their injured colleague. He's in a bad way and needs to be got out quickly. But they're still being targeted and can't continue. They cover the casualty with branches to camouflage him and take cover. But it's too late. The rescue team get hit.
Сюда, пацаны, пустить блиндаж. Ёбана русня, блядь. У меня нога. А ну, Івчанка, глянь. Тут сильної нема. Осколок просто. Так, раз. Братик, тут точно не треба ставити турнікет.
11 now harmed, trying to get 1 casualty out.
Льоха, мені їхать?
Eventually, they get them all to safety. But it has been at great cost. And that is why the Da Vinci Battalion are trying to design new battlefield technology. This is a buggy which could evacuate casualties without the need for stretcher bearers, and also carry a machine gun to defend the trenches. And this is just a games console.
Yeah, this is just a game console. We can move here, and we can move up and down.
Having lost friends in battle, Alexander is determined to mechanize this war to minimize its harm.
The enemy is like a predator who smells blood. He just waits in the sky for us to go and get our comrades. In Bakhmut, we lost 21 people in the month and a half. Conservative estimates suggest we killed about 500. That's a ratio of 1 to 20. I want our ratio to be 500 to 0.
It may look rudimentary at the moment, but the demands of this war have advanced battlefield technology and are changing the way of warfare. Emma Murphy, News at 10, eastern Ukraine.
An unholy row has broken out within the Church of England over how to deal with the highly charged issue of sexual abuse. A three-strong panel of experts appointed by the Church to oversee how it handles such claims has in effect been sacked. There had already been disagreements between two of the panel and senior bishops. One panel member told us the Church had frustrated their work at every level.
Scrutiny of the Church of England's safeguarding practices is something it describes as urgent and indispensable. But it's just sacked the very people it appointed to give independent oversight of how it dealt with abuse. It says the board's relationship with senior bishops had broken down, but Jasvinder Sanghera, one of three who sat on that board, says the Church made it impossible for them to do their job.
At every point, they've tied our hands behind our back. For a national director to say we're too survivor focused is really concerning. And the way they communicated this demonstrates a lack of compassion, absolutely. And they are the Church of England.
Little more than 6 weeks ago, the role of the Anglican Church was celebrated at the King's coronation. Its leader, Archbishop Justin Welby, played a central part. But he's now admitted that behind the scenes he was struggling to resolve an internal rift, something he hinted at during a discussion last week at the Religion and Media Festival.
There will always be safeguarding challenges. There always have been. It's the difference is now that we're open about it. But until we have a fully independent central safeguarding system in the Church of England, we cannot hold our heads up.
In a joint statement today from the Archbishops of Canterbury and York, they said that sacking the Independent Safeguarding Board was not a decision they'd taken lightly.
They said they knew that this was a serious setback and that they bitterly regretted that things had come to this point, but added it is clear that there is no prospect of resolving the disagreement and that it's getting in the way of the vital work of serving victims and survivors.
But one survivor we spoke to said it was the Church that was getting in the way, and he praised the work of the board.
When you've been raped, when you've been abused, to trust again is extremely hard, and they have worked so hard. The Church doesn't like it. The Church doesn't like genuine independence, so they've pulled the rug from underneath them.
The Church describes this as a reset of a crucial safeguarding system. But for survivors, it is another reason that the Church is somewhere they don't feel safe. Chloe Keedy, News at 10.
Still to come on the programme tonight. Anchoring the Windrush generation at the heart of British life, 75 years on. And Cheeky Frankie steals a kiss from Camilla to crown his perfect royal ascot. Those reports and much more on the way. Join us again in just a minute. Welcome back. Across the country, the contribution of the Windrush generation to the life of Britain has been celebrated today, the 75th anniversary of the ship's arrival from the Caribbean. For those on board that voyage and later ones, their lives changed forever, and so did Britain. The King said recognising the anniversary was crucially important because of the immeasurable difference that the Windrush generation had made.
Thank you for coming before us.
A celebration of a defining moment in Britain's history that has shaped a modern, multicultural nation. Commemorating the contribution of the Windrush generation to the fabric of British life since first arriving 75 years ago. The Empire Windrush docked at Tilbury in Essex in 1948, carrying more than 800 passengers from the Caribbean to new lives in the UK. On board that day, Alfred Gardner, one of only 2 surviving passengers.
It was cold. That was the only thing that bothered me when I first came. My idea was to work and raise a good family. And I think I've raised a beautiful family. I'm proud of him.
75 years on, a more modest boat pulled into Tilbury today, symbolising the journey Alfred and hundreds of others made. While dozens walked in a commemorative march through South London, carrying a floral Windrush anchor. And the young remembered the enduring legacy of the generations in whose footsteps they follow. At Windsor Castle, the King attended a special service in St George's Chapel, which echoed to the sounds of songs and remembrance.
I want to refer to them as Windrush pioneers. Pioneers who paved the way for the generations who came after them.
For many, the commemoration's bittersweet, after the scandal which saw thousands wrongly classed as illegal immigrants. But this story was remembered today as one of pride as well as prejudice. Sejal Karia, News at 10.
Now, during the pandemic, when Sir Chris Whitty spoke, the country listened. Well, today it was the COVID inquiry that was listening to whether the Chief Medical Officer thought the UK could have been better prepared. In a word, the answer, it seems, was yes. Sir Chris told the inquiry the UK did not have the ability to scale up quickly to deal with the pandemic in areas such as testing. He also said there should have been a more imaginative approach to how we would respond to a major pandemic. As promised, the rail union, the RMT, has set more dates for strike action. They'll be held next month, Thursday the 20th of July, Saturday the 22nd and the following Saturday the 29th. Once again, 14 train companies will be affected. And one of the trailblazers of the Scottish National Party, Winnie Ewing, has died at the grand old age of 93. She became the party's first female parliamentarian when she unexpectedly won the Hamilton by-election in 1967. She also became an MEP and MSP. Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, called her a shining light of the party. To the women's Ashes now, where England had a decent day in this summer's one-off test match against Australia. Australian batters started well. Elise Perry hit 99 for the undisputed world champions, but England's bowlers, including Sophie Ecclestone, fought back after a rain break. Australia finished day one on 328 for 7. The other figure worth recording, the match was watched by 5,500 people, a record for a women's test match at the ground in England. And finally, a crowning moment at Royal Ascot. The King had his first winner at the event since he was crowned. Desert Hero lived up to his name with the closest of victories. And the late Queen's granddaughter, Zara Tindall, told ITV Sport it had been a bittersweet moment for the royal family to think how excited our grandmother would have been, she said. It was also a good day for that other King of Royal Ascot, the jockey Frankie Dettori. He won again in his final Gold Cup before he retires.
From the hats, and there goes the cheer.
It is always quite some spectacle, and the smiles were there from the start. But who could have predicted such a fairy tale finish for the new King and Queen's first Ascot?
And it's the royal runner on the outside. Barney and King with Desert Hero. Desert Hero has won for His Majesty the King.
Drama on the line.
But all smiles as His Majesty.
Delight in the royal box at Desert Hero's dash to victory. And memories too of another day a decade ago.
And look at the delight there, the sheer joy.
When the late Queen's glee at her own winner was equally unmistakable. All of this meaning mixed emotions for her granddaughter Zara.
Bittersweet, isn't it? It's, I think how proud and excited our grandmother would have been, the Queen would have been. But, you know, to have a winner for Charles and Camilla and, you know, keep that dream alive was incredible, and what a race.
What a race, and what a moment for the jockey who brought the winner in at 18-1.
Tom, what was that like for you?
Genuinely, probably one of the proudest moments of being in the saddle so far.
Frankie Dettori will win on his final Gold Cup ride.
Glory too for the legendary Frankie Dettori, lifting the Gold Cup at his final Ascot before making the most of his status as racing royalty by daring to kiss the Queen. It wasn't all going the King's way either with this minor mishap. But nothing could take the shine off a day like this one.
Rachel Younger, News at 10.
And that is it for tonight from all of us here. Good night. We will see you tomorrow.